So as with yesterday's video, having read through the less redacted documents, a few things have popped out that I kind of skimmed over last time, I guess, that didn't really grab my attention, or in this instance, it's because there's been more narrative put out by Daniel, which then tends to put a spanner in the works. So in this video, I'm going right back to the beginning again and taking a look at the part of the narrative where they claim that the children must have gotten out through that sliding door at the back of the house and then went and played in the backyard and then just vanished. Now, given that Malaya, Daniel and Janie are all now trying to push the abduction narrative quite hard, I could turn around and point out that in terms of the timeline, we've been told that, they vanished sometime after 8 o'clock in the morning, and talk about the likelihood of two children, especially, being abducted from a backyard that is not visible from the road in what is essentially a rural area on a school day, knowing that Malaya only decided, apparently, to call in, or do the app at least, at 6:20 that morning. So the chances of someone actually abducting those children in that situation are only a little bit higher than the chances of someone abducting this little Gus that's gone missing in South Australia, which some of you may have heard that case. He was a 4-year-old boy, I believe, wandered off from a station in outback South Australia, and it's a huge station. Obviously, there is zero possibility of anyone having abducted this child. So, and of course, police are saying there's nothing that would indicate foul play. Looks like he simply has wandered off. We're talking a station that is thousands of acres with basically gates that you would have to get through to get onto the property. And I would imagine that, like most large properties in Australia, those gates would have locks on them. So I would say, while that is even less probable, the probability of two children being abducted from that location in Gairloch Road is still pretty slim. Child abductions usually involve one child, and usually you're looking at one sex over the other. It's very, very rare that you are going to hear of a child abduction of a boy and a girl. But I think most people now, when you apply logic and critical thinking, it seems quite clear that these children, whatever happened, occurred on the Thursday night. So everything to do with Friday morning is pure fiction. So even though we have now this information on the document that Malaya rang Cindy around 8:30, when she should have actually still been asleep, with the children just playing unattended out wherever, pick a room, well, we know that the children weren't around when that missed call happened. Well, we can be pretty confident about that anyway. So, to me, the time that Malaya rang Cindy, the only relevance there is that it puts a massive hole in their original narrative, because Malaya couldn't possibly have been still asleep if she was trying to ring Cindy at 8:30. But anyway, like I said, that's all fiction. Aside from the fact that we do know that she tried to ring Cindy. You know where I'm coming from. Anyway, so this narrative about getting out through the sliding door, again, we can be pretty confident that it is pure fiction. Because, like I said, the likelihood of an abduction from that location, particularly with 2 children, on a day when they should have been at school, infinitesimal. And of course, everything that we've looked at points towards these children already being gone by Friday morning. But I'm still going to take a look at everything that we have now in relation not just to the sliding door, but to the front door, because I think there's something significant with that that may actually point towards or give us some clue in terms of what may have happened on the Thursday evening, Thursday afternoon, whenever it occurred. So I believe this is the first version that we get from Daniel. In the documents, of course. Daniel said he got up and he didn't hear the kids. He thought it was only a few minutes since Lily last poked her head in the door. Poked her head in the door, came into the room, didn't say a word, did say a word. Choose your own adventure. He went out and saw the back sliding door was closed. The kids didn't usually close it when they went outside. Their boots were gone. I'm curious as to know the motivation for pushing this part of the narrative in terms of the back sliding door was closed. Daniel ran around the house looking for them, but they were not there. Malaya got up when he got up as well and was looking for the kids. Daniel ran outside, but they were not in the yard and he couldn't see them. He got in the car and drove around, then ran around in the woods. And then continues on, he searched for hours. So we have here basically Daniel discovered that the children weren't in the house, but that sliding door was closed. Then he ran around the house, which presumably they're referring to inside the house, and they weren't there. And then he ran outside, they weren't in the yard, so he got in the car and drove around. Just put a pin in that, because there's a few things missing from this part of his narrative at this point in time.
And they happen to just get out that sliding door and we can't hear it when it opens. And they were outside playing, but we weren't aware of it at the time.
So on one hand, you've got Daniel's narrative where the children were in the house, he could hear them, there had been a few minutes and he went out and that back door was closed. In that part of the narrative, all he says, the back door was closed and their boots were gone. So he doesn't offer up in that part of it that they may have gone out the back door, although we hear that in other instances. Malaya is quite confident here that they went out the back door and that the back door is quiet. They don't usually hear it. So she has them happened to get out that sliding door and they were outside playing, but they weren't aware of it at the time. One of the new things in the documents is that Malaya actually states that Janie claims that she heard them playing. So that's the one instance when, yet again, Janie's and Malaya's narratives are closer than Daniel's is to anybody else's. But what we have here is Malaya's pretty confident that these children let themselves out. Daniel, he claims that he's not really sure, but apparently him and Malaya got up at the same time. And yet the back door was closed, the boots were gone. So in this narrative, in this version of the narrative, Daniel can't push the Malaya's responsible for this part of it because Malaya was apparently with him the whole time. Anyway, let's take a look at some more of what we've been told.
Jack was out playing in the kitchen, I'm guessing, and they slid open the back sliding door. It's almost like silent to hear it slide open. But they slid it open. The boots were right beside the door. And just proceeded to, I'm guessing, play outside, and then they must have just got out to the back fence, and then they were gone.
I'm thinking this is probably one of the first times that he's tried this version of the narrative out, because you can hear the lack of fluency, the stuttering. He's really got to work on it to actually get this going. It sounds a lot like Malaya's version of the narrative. So in this one, he's guessing that they're playing in the kitchen, but he sounds like he's confident that he says, and they slid open the sliding door. He's not saying, I think they must have, but it's a positive here. They slid it open. And then he's guessing that they must have played outside. So here he is quite confident that they slid open that sliding door, took themselves outside and decided to play outside. This, of course, is not in keeping with his current narrative, where he's now giving hints to the listeners so that they will believe that Malaya is responsible and that she organised for someone to come and take the children. But essentially, what they're both laying out here in their narratives at this point in time is that they are certain the kids went out through that sliding the door. They are certain the children were playing in the yard. But after that, they've got no idea. They're not saying that there's anything that would convince them that it was an abduction. They're not saying there's anything that would convince them that the children wandered off into the woods. Their narrative ends with the children being in the yard, and then the children were gone. You'll note in this instance, Daniel is saying that this door is almost silent. So he's essentially admitting, oh, we can actually hear that door when it opens and closes. So that's a contradiction to Malaya saying, we can't hear it. We don't hear it when that happens. Now, we know that at the very least, Daniel was paying close attention to what was being said about him online. So we start to see the narrative change in terms of that back sliding door, because there are questions that people have that are valid questions, and so he has to find a way to explain it. So the biggest thing that they start pushing is when Janie does her interview, and she's really pushing hard to make sure that people understand that, no, there's no way they could have heard that door.
So this is the patio door?
This is the patio door.
That Jack and Lily would have...
That Jack and Lily came out of.
Okay. And so tell us why we've heard about the patio door.
Because everybody's saying on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok that the patio door makes a noise, and why they didn't hear the door open. The bedroom is back there. Okay.
That far window.
The last window is the bedroom.
And so they would have come out this door.
They would have come out this door
that morning.
Yes.
And then they went and played on the swing set.
Yes.
And that's when you heard them.
That's when I heard them.
Mentioned on my interview, and I'll tell you now, on my interview about the sliding door, the lady that did the interview, her name is Allie, very nice lady. She was the one that opened the door. I asked her to do it for me so everybody wouldn't think that I was doing something to disrupt this investigation, or people saying, oh, she opened it up lightly, or she did this, or she did that. I got Allie to open the door twice. So, she was the one that opened up the door.
So you now have Janie basically getting the interviewer to open and close the door to prove the fact that the door is so quiet you can't hear it. Now, like I said, I think it's a moot point anyway, because we know this never occurred. But there is a definite click at the end when the door is shut, and I'm actually going to come back to that and point something out that I think is extremely significant. Janie points out, though, that, look, their room, that's right down the end there. So far away from the door. And we do have Malaya claiming that she had turned the television on. So yes, it is feasible that maybe they wouldn't hear that door close if the children had gone out that door. But there's a point that Belinda makes, which I think is super important. And it's something that I think I had mentioned early on. And then this is something that Belinda mentioned in a discussion on It's a Crime Shame. So I'm going to play a few clips from Belinda. I'm going to come back and address this door, whether or not they could hear it, whether or not, I mean, Daniel said, well, you can hear it, he essentially said. He said, it's quiet. But he wasn't saying that it's so quiet you can't hear it. Janie got this Allie to do a demonstration, and to me it didn't really sound super, super quiet. But yes, if they were in that end room with the television going, then it is possible that they may not hear it.
I asked if those were the doors that the children went out, and she said yes, and she opened and closed them to show me how quiet they were, which I did find a little strange.
I love that Belinda thinks logically and critically about all this stuff. It can't be easy for her listening to these clowns with their stories online, but at least she has the intelligence to figure out when things aren't right. And she's so right. It is really odd, this insistence on demonstrating, let me prove to you how quiet this door is. I don't think you're going to believe my story otherwise, so I've got to prove to you. So we have Janie getting Allie, the interviewer, to open and close the door to prove that they probably couldn't hear it. And you have Belinda asking Malaya, is this the door? So Malaya's got to demonstrate to her how quiet it is. That is not the act of someone who is being truthful. If you're being truthful about a situation like that, in your head, you know you're telling the truth. So you're not going to question whether or not people believe you or not, unless they actually say, we don't believe you. But that's not what's happened here. These people have immediately decided they needed to prove what they're saying, which straight up tells me even if I wasn't already leaning towards Thursday night. But that straight up tells me this need, this desperate need to prove that the door is quiet, says to me that, yeah, this door had nothing to do with the disappearance of these children. These children did not let themselves out that door. They did not shut the door again after they went out. And it doesn't matter how much noise that door makes.
I said, what time did they get up? She said, between 8 and 8:30. She said, I heard them playing in the other room. She goes, and I kind of drifted off to sleep. She goes, but they must have got out of the door. And I said, that's the door right there. And she said, yes. And she opened and closed the door. It is a fairly quiet door. It's not a loud door, but I mean, it's a patio door. So unless you're kind of listening, you really don't hear patio doors open and close. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people are going on about it, but you don't overly, unless your ears are tuned for it to know the door is opened up. As a parent, they should have been tuned in.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent, they should have been tuned in. And I agree with that. Now, first of all, I do want to point out that for me, as someone with ADHD, if I was in one end of the house and someone opened a sliding door in the other end of the house, I'd still hear it. Because my brain is wired that way because of my ADHD, that I will be one of those people that will be sitting in a meeting and I will hear the freezer ticking in the kitchen next to the room where we're in a meeting, and it will drive me nuts. So it would depend. If Malaya or Daniel were neurodivergent, then they probably might actually hear that door open and shut. But still, it's a moot point. But Belinda's comment here, as a parent, they should have been tuned in. They had a little girl who was, at the very least, crawling. You would hope that she was crawling at 16 months. And we have Daniel claiming that these kids often did not close the door. So you have a little tacker who, if she got out that back door onto that dangerous deck, could do herself a serious injury, knocking something down on top of herself or falling off that deck. So you would think that as parents they would be in tune to the sound of these children opening that door, knowing that doing so could put the toddler or crawler, wherever she's at developmentally, at risk of extreme physical harm. Which of course goes back to an argument that one of the first arguments I made before we started to realise that Friday morning was just a big load of fiction. And that is, if you know these children go out that back door, and you know that they don't always shut that back door, especially if you have a baby who's 16 months old and who could end up severely injured if that door is left open and she decides to crawl through or toddle through, why the heck wouldn't you have that door locked in the first place? It makes no sense. Now, in this video, I'm not planning on highlighting any of the body language that Daniel uses in this video. But I'm just going to give you a quick reminder for those of you who watched my Chris Watts video, where I did the comparison between Chris Watts and Daniel. And it made it easier to see what Daniel was doing, because frighteningly enough, Chris Watts does not mask as well as Daniel. So I'm going to give you a bit of a checklist here. Look for the lizard tongue. Look for the fish hook in the mouth. And also, look for the duper's delight. There may be others. I haven't looked overly closely at it just yet. But they're the three that, just from having a really, really quick look, that I spotted straight up.
Now, I've read in the document that Malaya said something to the effect that the kids didn't always close the door behind them when they went outside. It kind of made it seem like there was times that they did. Is that accurate, or was that something that when they went outside?
I mean, the percentage that they would actually close the door behind them, it's very minimal.
But they have done it in the past, though, correct?
It's usually, I mean, Daniel, even I don't close the door all the way sometimes.
Oh, okay. And so it was all the way shut.
Yeah, it was all the way shut. I mean, fully all the way shut.
That is weird.
So, and and some of the investigators, when they were here, they came all the way down to the bedroom, sat on the bed, and we had a dead quiet. And they tried to open up the door. Well, I think it was Mom who went out there and opened and just closed the door, and he couldn't hear it from inside the bedroom, sitting on the bed with the bedroom door shut.
Yeah.
So,
is the door heavy?
It is heavy, but when the kids got their hands on it, they would have to put both hands on it, and they could slide it closed.
Okay.
So it is possible for them to close it. They just need to, work at closing it.
So I have to say, it frustrates me listening to this turkey guy, because he basically was prompting Daniel. He also was a little bit inaccurate with some of the things he was saying in that interview. But here, he's like, I read in the documents that Malaya said the kids don't always close the door behind them when they go outside. But then he's prompting Daniel with the answer that he wants. He wants Daniel to say to him, yes, but the door was closed. So what Daniel says is that basically even I don't close the door all the way sometimes. And this is in reference to his saying that it's very rare for the children to close the door. And then he's like, even I don't close the door all the way sometimes. Now, I thought when I first saw this that he was being a smart ass. You got that grin on his face. He thought it was hilarious. Which frustrates me and makes me quite angry, and I'll tell you why in a moment, so put a pin in that. But he then goes on to say, after saying, look, even I don't manage to shut it all the way sometimes, he then goes on with it was fully all the way shut. This is part of the new narrative. He wants us to understand that it's hard for the children to close that door. So he wants us to make the jump that since it was fully all the way shut, even though these children rarely shut it all the way, and how even he doesn't always shut it all the way, he wants us to make that jump that someone came into the house and took the children. This is his new narrative. And while he didn't make it explicit in this interview, you can bet that we're going to hear more about this. So what Daniel said next demonstrated to me that the children going out this door was actually a source of tension in the home. And it was something that would pee him off. That's when you did get a bit of fish hook happening, and you could hear in his tone that he did not like the fact that these children did not shut the door. So this is definitely something that has been an issue in the past, which is interesting. This plays into one of my theories. I have a few different theories. One of my theories being that he intentionally shut these children out overnight to prove a point because of them leaving the door open. But he says if they put both hands on it, they could slide it closed. Now, he's not saying that actually he's seen them do it. He's saying that he believes it's a possibility. He says if they got their hands, both hands on it, they could slide it closed. So he's not saying when they used both their hands, then it was possible for them to slide it closed. He's offering a scenario in which he believes essentially they should have actually managed to shut this damn door, and he's not happy about it. Because he follows through by saying they just need to work at closing it. The words themselves stand alone without any body language. The words themselves stand alone without any sort of tone in the voice. They just need. This is the thing they need to do. This is the one thing. They need to work at closing it. This says to me that definitely there was tension in the home about these children going out that door and not being able to close the door. I don't believe these children had the strength or the height to close that door. Because, don't forget, they're not simply sliding that handle, but they have to reach up to slide. That requires additional strength. Trust me, I know this. It's 6 months since I broke my shoulder. Actually, it's probably closer to 9 because it was still summer. We were still getting these stinking hot summer days, and I had that arm sling thingy on, and so it's probably closer to 9 months since I broke my shoulder. I still struggle with anything that is above shoulder height to slide something, push something, lift something. So for these little kids, that door, they had to reach up as well as have the strength to push. That's a lot of strength for children that size if a door is stubborn. From what Daniel has said here, I suspect this is something that's been thrown in their faces multiple times. Use both your hands, and then you could slide it closed. You just need to work at it. And you'll note he gives the narrative too of, well, we all went and sat in our bedroom, and then Janie went and opened and shut the door and you couldn't hear it. Can you imagine those poor detectives? Because I'm sure that it probably wasn't them who went, let's sit on a bed with you, Daniel Martel, and Malaya, and get your mother to go and open and shut the door. I mean, detectives have their way of going through and doing these things for themselves. They know they had their routine, they know how they want to do it. They don't need a Daniel Martel running the show. But that's what it sounds like what was going on here. Again, it's that insistence on trust us. Look, everybody has heard this door. We've demonstrated it to the entire world. We will even transport the door and demonstrate it to a jury if we have to prove to you that it is silent. Now, here's the thing with these sliding doors. They have rollers, top and bottom. And if you've ever had a sliding door in your house and you've had to replace the rollers, you know how much of a pain that can become. Because as the rollers wear out, the door drops. Makes it harder to close because it's got the resistance. But not only that, when you do close it, you've got to actually give it a lift at the end for it to latch. Because with the rollers having worn out, that means that it's not tracking at the right level that it's meant to. So it is not going to latch unless you lift it. So what I was saying, I thought Daniel was just being a smart ass when he said, even I don't close the door all the way sometimes. Until I watched this demonstration again. What I'm going to do is I've only grabbed a 5-second clip from where this reporter is closing the door. I'm going to play it for you at normal speed, and then so you don't have to try and listen to really, really slow talking, I'm going to mute it and play it for you at half speed. Pay really close attention to when she closes that door. Now, we can hear when that door is closed that it does make a bit of noise. But this time, listen to the noise it's making and pay close attention to how she is closing that door. That door needs new runners. It's actually dropped on the runners, and she actually did have to lift it slightly to close it. It wasn't just a slide along smoothly and it latches. She slid it along, and then you could actually see, if you watch the muscles in her arm and her shoulder, you can see that she had to actually physically lift it a little bit to make it latch. So I will just quickly play that for you again. That's a grown woman, and she had to work at closing it, to quote Daniel. There's no way those children are capable of closing that door. So this is all a load of BS. Like I said, we can be pretty confident that whatever occurred did not happen Friday morning. But from listening to the way Daniel was talking, from watching that reporter just then, and realising that that door has dropped on its rollers, it needs new rollers, those children would not be able to shut that door fully themselves. The reason Daniel had that smirk on his face when he said, even I don't close the door all the way sometimes, that was leakage there. because he knows that those children would not have been able to close that door all the way themselves. To reach up above shoulder height, pull that closed and get that little bit of lift to make it latch, that's not going to happen, not with a 6-year-old, certainly not with a 4-year-old, not even if they try and work together. Now, before I move on and start talking about the other door, the front door of the house, there's a few things that I want to point out that I think are quite important here. The first thing that is important to recognise is that Daniel and Malaya would not have had time, after calling 911, in between each other's interviews, to compare notes, meaning that their narrative, they had to have come up with their entire narrative before they rang 911. The story about the back door, the story about the front door. They had to have agreed on what was going into the narrative. Here is paragraph 1. We were snoozing and Lily stuck her head in the room and we could hear Jack. They got themselves a bit confused there and somehow swapped scripts a few times so that sometimes it was Malaya who was awake and heard them all. Sometimes it was Daniel, depending on who's telling the story. Then we have paragraph 2. The children were playing somewhere in the house and they're quite confident that they went out that back door and their boots were gone as well. So they decided before they rang 911 what was going to be in the stories. That is important to take into account here. Because my question is this: why is the front door significant? This is information that they both offered up, but which actually doesn't connect with the rest of their narrative. You have children who like to go out and play. There has never been any suggestion through the multiple narratives over the past 5 months that these children would ever consider going out the front door to play. Because out the front door, there's no toys, there's no cubby house, there's no imaginary swings. Everything for their outside world existed outside that back door. There would have been no reason for those children to go out the front door. I mean, you think about your own childhood or your own children. One thing that we all learn from an early age is that you go out the front door when you are going somewhere. You don't go out the front door to play. I mean, when I was growing up, I lived in a suburb that was pretty close to the city. The biggest park in our neighbourhood was basically I had to walk past one house, the corner shop, and cross the road. And then, obviously, there would always be other kids that we knew from the neighbourhood playing in that park or playing down by the creek. But these kids live out in the back of Whoop Whoop. There's no park that they're going to wander down the road and go to and play with their friends. their world on that property was that backyard. So the back door should have been the only focus in this narrative. And yet for some reason Malaya and Daniel both have to introduce the front door. And there's never any suggestion of the possibility of the children maybe going out the front door. There's not even any attempt to connect the front door. Well, there's a loose connection in terms of, oh, well, I know that they couldn't have got out the front door because it was locked or it had a wrench or something on the top. But, like I said, it's not something that you would normally need to explain. Unless you are trying really, really hard to sell that narrative of these children going out the back door, taking themselves out the back door, letting themselves out, closing that door, lifting it to make it latch, playing in the backyard and then vanishing. If that scenario of them letting themselves out into the backyard and shutting the door for themselves was real, why the need to push this whole thing of because they certainly couldn't have got out the front door? Because, again, it's over-explaining. It's offering up additional information. So why did they need to discuss this front door? First of all, I suspect the only times as those children could let themselves out that backsliding door would have been if it was already partially opened. If it was not latched so that all they had to do was push it. They would have to push it pretty hard, but if it was not latched, meaning they didn't have to get the initial lift to unlatch it as well, then they probably could push it open. I think pushing it shut might have been a real struggle for them, but I don't think they would have been able to open that door if it was latched, and I'm pretty certain they would not have been able to fully close that door. But anyway, I want to move on to talking about the front door. Why was it important to include it in the narrative? Like I said, most households, it's not even something that kids think about doing. Because from an early age, they learn that you go into the backyard to play. The front yard is just it's a no-go zone. You only go out that front door if you're heading out to go somewhere. Yes, I know, Amira is in fine form tonight with her snoring, I have to say. The irony, of course, being that Amira actually means princess, but she doesn't snore like a princess. Okay, so back to the question. Why the need to add this front door into the narrative when it shouldn't have really mattered? When it shouldn't have been something that you even thought of adding into the narrative? Okay, so let's look at Malaya's statement first with the RCMP. She said when Daniel was looking for the kids, he opened the front door. He put a wrench on top of the door the night before and it didn't fall down. So Daniel said they must have gone out the back sliding door. And like so many people said, why the heck would you put a wrench on top of a door when you have young kids in the house, if there was some sort of possibility that they might actually open that door? Because a wrench falling from that height onto a soft skull, that could well be lights out permanently. So Malaya says here the door was shut, but the kids would normally leave it open if they went outside because it was so heavy. There are times when they would close it. So for some reason for these guys, they wanted to establish the whole thing of the door being shut, which I still haven't quite figured out the rationale behind that. But let's look at what she's saying here about the wrench. While he was looking for the kids, he opened the front door. He put it there the night before. She's not saying it's something that they usually do. She's not saying normally at night time there's a wrench above the door. No, she's saying he put it there the night before, which tends to imply this is a new thing. And then she says, or in this statement it says, and it didn't fall down. Now this could be just poor grammar on the part of the author of this report, or it could be that Malaya is saying that when Daniel opened the front door, the wrench didn't fall down. I'm thinking it's just poor grammar on the part of the person writing the actual report here. But basically saying he put it on top of the door the night before suggests that it wasn't a regular thing, it was just something he somehow randomly did out of the blue the night before. But let's just put a pin in that and see what other statements were made. Daniel confirmed the kids could not go out the front door because he jammed a wrench or a bolt in there to make sure the door didn't open. Well, now it's not on top of the door, is it? It's jammed in. And it could be a wrench or it might be a bolt. But apparently, even though he's the one who did it, he's not really sure. This is really problematic for me. Their stories look similar, but you have Malaya saying that he put it on top of the door, put a wrench on top of the door. You have Daniel saying, well, it could have been a wrench, it could have been a bolt, and it was jammed in to the door. He said he does that most nights because there is a bear that used to hang around outside. That morning he had to rip the door open to get out, and the metal piece fell on the floor. So he knew there was no way they could have gone out that way. So this is where we get the bear being introduced. Most nights, he jams a wrench or a bolt in the door because there's a bear that hangs around. According to Malaya, he'd only done it the night before, and according to Malaya, he'd only sat a wrench on top of the door. And she didn't even mention the bear. That wasn't brought into the narrative. Now, he's saying here that he does it most nights. He then goes on to say that he had to rip the door open to get out, and a metal piece fell on the floor. He's talking about something different from a wrench or a bolt. He's talking about a metal piece from that door. To me, I'm thinking that's the metal piece that sits on the door frame. So I am going to come back to that shortly. I just want to take you back to his previous statement when he basically said that he went out, he saw the back sliding door was closed and the kids didn't usually close it. He said he ran around the house looking for them, and then he ran outside, but they were not in the yard and he couldn't see them. Well, Malaya claims that he went out the front door looking for the children. He says he went outside, but they were not in the yard. Well, you're not going to run out the front door, around the house, either climb through that hole in the fence that hadn't been fixed or run all the way up the driveway to near the RV so you can check in the backyard. You are going to go straight to that sliding door and go out there. So this doesn't fit with Malaya saying that he went out through the front door. Because apparently the first thing he did, he went outside and he looked in the yard and couldn't see them. And then he went and got the car and drove around. So it doesn't appear in this part of the narrative that he went out that front door. And yet you've got Malaya saying he went out the front door to look for the children. You've got him saying that he had to rip it open. But why would you have to rip it open? Because your first thought would be to check that yard. Why are you going to go out the front of the house, which is not a play area, which does not have any of the playthings that we've heard these children like? I mean, Janie was talking about Lily liking using the play kitchen out the back there. Janie claims that they would play on the swings. Janie claims that Jack would go and let her chickens out. All these activities are activities that occur in the backyard. So why would Daniel need to rip the front door open and go out the front door? Especially since the first thing he did outside was check the yard. So then that comes back to the question of why is this front door even in the narrative?
My brother had a bear on his doorstep, and he was watching it through the window. It just seems he opened up that door, and that bear heard that door open. Man, that bear was gone like a bat out of hell. So,
well, that's one heck of a coinky-dink, isn't it? Janie telling this story about a bear that used to hang around her brother's place. And this bear went for the front door at her brother's place. And I think she was talking about, it's confusing because on one hand she's talking about her own dog, but I suspect that that's not what she was referring to there, and she might have been talking about Ron's dog. But essentially I think what she was talking about is a dog scaring this bear off. So is Daniel's bear story inspired by something that actually happened at Ron's place? Because the way Janie's telling it, it actually sounds like someone telling a story about something that really, truly happened. I mean, she builds it up to the point of the bear basically hightailing it out of there because it encountered this dog. It sounds like a real story to me. So I'm thinking that this story of Daniel's of needing to secure the front door because of a bear probably comes from this story about a bear at his uncle's place. So now we have the latest version of this story about the front door. And you'll notice that there is something missing from this version. And I just want to point out that it seems like this part of the narrative was probably told 5 months ago and then set aside because it really didn't have a part of in the narrative. It was an add-on. It wasn't necessary. So it's not something that has been rehearsed over the past 5 months. And remember what they say. You have to have a good memory to be a good liar. So if the last time Daniel told this story was 5 months ago to the RCMP, that would explain why there is something missing from this story, even though this turkey guy was bending over backwards to try and help him to remember what he was meant to say.
Some folks are saying that, they may have walked out the back sliding glass door. That seems like the only logical explanation for them to have exited the house. You had something on the front door, correct?
Yeah, on the front porch, there's the front porch door, and then there's the inner door on the front. And I know for 100% they did not go out through that door. So, because when I went and got the keys and tried to come back into the house, couldn't get into the front door, right? I had to go around from the back. And then I went out through the front door.
Gotcha.
So that's how I know they did not exit through the front. They exited out through the back sliding glass door.
So this turkey guy feeds him the answer. It's the only logical solution, because you had something on the front door, correct? Because this guy said that he read the documents. He did everything bar say, because you had a wrench or a bolt on the front door, didn't you? But Daniel forgot the part about the wrench or the bolt. And instead, you get this random thing about him going outside, going around the house, and then having to go back around the house because the key wouldn't open the lock. So he had to go back around and then open the door from inside. Well, first of all, that doesn't fit with the story that him and Malaya gave of him going out the front door to get outside, and basically him, according to his story, having to rip it open to get out. And there's no mention of the wrench or the bolt. So he seems to have forgotten the bear story. He forgot that there's supposed to be a wrench or a bolt wedged into the door or sitting on top of it. He's claiming he had the keys in his hand, but he couldn't open the door. If that was the case, then straight away, having already explained about the wrench or the bolt, then turning around and just saying that you couldn't open the door and you had to go back inside and open it from the inside, I would expect to hear that explanation, particularly after being specifically asked you had something on the front door. I would expect to hear the explanation. I had to come back inside and open it from the inside because there was a wrench wedged into it or something. But he doesn't offer that explanation because it never happened. I don't believe that there was ever a wrench on top of the door or wedged in the door. I don't believe there was a bolt wedged in the door. And this whole narrative of, on one hand, he supposedly went out the front door to search for the children, according to Malaya. And then, according to him, he had to rip the door open to go search for the children. But the first place he looked was in the yard. So he must have ran all the way around the house to go check in the yard. That makes no sense. And now you get this version of he went outside first, meaning he went out through the sliding door and for some reason tried to come in through the front door. So he needed to come inside for some reason. And when the door didn't open, he went back around the house, came in through the sliding door. So he was inside. He achieved his goal. He came inside. But he still had to open that door for some reason. It's not a logical narrative. His narrative is falling apart. And he forgot the bit about the bear, the wrench, the bolt. But here's the curious thing about all this. And I'll explain why I think it's quite interesting and quite curious. And that is the comment that Belinda made about when she was there. She spoke about Malaya demonstrating the sliding door, but she also mentioned that that front door was open the entire time that she was there. My first question is, was it actually warm enough, being as it was May, for that front door to be sitting open the whole time? Or is there another reason why that front door was sitting open the whole time? I just want to go back to this statement that was made by Daniel, where he claims that he had jammed a wrench or a bolt, he didn't know what it was, apparently, in the door to make sure it didn't open. Don't forget, he also mentioned that he tried to get in using keys. Well, we don't have bears in Australia, so maybe I'm wrong, but I would imagine that a bear would struggle with a locked door. So why you would need to also jam a wrench or a bolt in it, I don't know. But here's the thing. He says that morning he had to rip the door open to get out, and the metal piece fell on the floor. We've established that there was no need for him to go out that front door. And in fact, versions of his narrative have him going out the back door. Versions of his narrative have him searching the backyard first for those children, which would make it illogical to want to go out that front door. But what is significant is him describing the action of ripping open the front door and a metal piece falling on the floor. To me, while I don't think this would tie in with the whole narrative of the children getting out the back door, I suspect that Daniel might have lost his temper sometime prior to 911 being called for the children being missing. Whether it was the night before, whether it was that morning. To me, none of their narrative to do with the front door seems to really connect with their narrative of the children going missing. Logically, you wouldn't expect the children to go out the front door anyway. Logically, if you're saying you have keys in your hand to open the door but you still couldn't open it, why would you think that you are going to need to make it bear-proof if humans can't get in? So it seems to me that the story of this front door has been introduced to explain damage to the door frame. A piece of metal being basically ripped from the door frame or from the door itself. It's not very descriptive, a piece of metal. But it does sound like maybe the door plate where the door latches. Like I said, apparently when Belinda was there, the door was open the whole time. Maybe the door was open the whole time because it's been damaged and it couldn't be properly closed. Did something happen on the Thursday night where Daniel lost his temper? and whether or not it's connected with what happened to Lily and Jack. Could be. Maybe they decided to go outside and hide somewhere because he lost his temper. But it certainly sounds to me like he lost his temper and he damaged that door. And him and Malaya had to come up with a story to add to their narrative about the children getting outside to explain the damage to the door. Otherwise, explain to me, please, how this story relating to the front door is relevant, given that logically the children would have gone out the backyard, given that Daniel is saying that you need a key to get in and out of that door, given that apparently the children's boots are kept by the back door. They're not going to put their boots on and then walk through the house and try and unlock a locked door and go out the front door. If it is part of their routine to put their boots on as they go outside, that is just what they're going to do. They're not going to put their boots on, walk through the house and go out the front door and then go and play in the backyard. So to me, this suggests that there was some sort of violence either on the Thursday night or the Friday morning. Whether this resulted in the children hiding, whether this resulted in injuries to the children, I don't know, but I find it concerning. I cannot find any other logical explanation for both Daniel and Malaya introducing this bit of unnecessary information to both their narratives. It seems like their narrative about the back door doesn't really ring true, but this insertion of the front door being really hard to get open makes no sense when you actually start to break it down and look at it logically and critically. Now let's talk again, just before we finish, about offering up information that wasn't asked for. Because there's one thing in the document that to me stands out. It's like a big neon sign, particularly given what we now know about the situation in that house. It seems that Daniel was prone to violence. We've heard it from Wade. We've heard that one of the things that the CPS was investigating was black eyes and injuries to the children. So this one statement that I'm about to go through was a huge red flag for me. Going from the third line down, she said he is an involved parent and would help her, especially when she was overwhelmed. First red flag. He was not aggressive with the kids. Second red flag. But had a voice they listened to. Third red flag. There was never any physical discipline. Fourth red flag. Oh no, I broke my arm falling down the stairs. I got my black eye walking into a door. When you have these sorts of living situations, the person who is at the brunt of it makes exactly these kinds of reassurances. He's an involved parent, and he helps her, especially when she was overwhelmed. let's talk about coercive relationships where they bring the partner down to the point where they feel that they are completely, utterly useless, where they make them feel like a failure, where they may end up feeling constantly overwhelmed because they feel like they're just not capable anymore because they have been hammered down that much. He was not aggressive with the kids, but had a voice they listened to. Aggressive. She doesn't say, no, he didn't slap the kids or smack the kids or anything like that. The word here is aggressive. If someone is objecting and saying he's not aggressive, to me that's a red flag. Especially accompanied by had a voice they listened to. Does that mean once he yelled, they cowered and did what they were told? There was never any physical discipline. Doubling down on the he was not aggressive. Now, like I said, this is coming from a report, so we don't know how much of this is basically word for word what Malaya said. But the fact that there is so much of an attempt here to give a reassurance that he's a good parent, he's the one that stepped in when she became overwhelmed, he wasn't aggressive, the kids listened to him, and there was never any physical discipline. This to me seems to be pointing to the opposite of that. This seems to be pointing to what we've heard from Wade. This seems to be pointing to the information that came out with regards to the CPS file. And it makes me wonder just how tense things were in that house. And it makes me wonder what the deal is, first of all, with this sliding door where Malaya and Daniel both claim the kids closed that door. But to me it seems like it would be impossible. And you get Daniel very, very strongly saying they just need to work at closing it. Sounds like that was an ongoing argument. And now you have this elaborate story that seems to have been used to explain a damaged door frame. This piece of metal that dropped off. He wasn't saying the wrench dropped down from on top of the door, if it was Malaya's story, or this bolt dropped down from somewhere. No, he's talking about physical damage to a door. I can't tell you how or if it was connected, but it appears to me that there may have been violence in that house the night before those children were reported missing. It appears to me that the children's inability to close that sliding door was a source of tension, a source of anger. I'm just going to leave it at that. So on that note, thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button, get this video out there into the algorithm, and please leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Into